70s, and the Bible, The Good News for Modern Man, had just come out. And it was a paperback. Maybe it was only the New Testament at first. And they were putting stacks of it for free in every dormitory lobby. And one of my really good friends went in the lobby and just tore all of them up. And we thought that was hilarious, you know, that he'd torn up all these copies of the Bible. So, yeah, I was pretty hostile to Christianity. Well, a few things happened to me, though, that in my senior year that started to get my attention. One of the things was I was so convinced that Christians were stupid. And I said, you know, if I could meet 3 Christians that had some intelligence, then I would consider this faith. And I met 2. But I didn't run into the 3rd. I didn't recognize him right away. It was like God was kind of hearing me and challenging me back. One day I went down to where they were building a new library, and there was a lot of plywood paneling all around the building site. And I had some leftover paint from painting my apartment, so I brought down my green paint. And my real religion was feminism. We called it women's lib in the early 70s. So I painted a big women's liberation symbol, you know, the woman symbol with the fist in the middle. And I wrote, "Sisterhood is powerful," over the top. And I was standing there admiring it. I thought it looked wonderful. And a guy walked up to me, somebody I'd never seen before. I don't know who he was. It looked like another student. And he stopped by me, he looked at what I'd written, and then he said to me, "This is not important." It was an odd thing to say. And I kind of stared, and he said, this is not very important. And then he pointed at me and he said, "But there is something that is important, and you're going to find out what it is." And then he walked away. I never saw him again. I just stood there with my paintbrush dripping into the street. What was that? You know, as I look back, I can see I was not the kind of person that anybody could witness to. You know, I was not the kind of person anybody could argue logically with. My mind was closed, but things like that were sort of unsettling and disturbing and kind of making me think maybe I don't know everything or don't know everything yet. I met this really cute guy named Gary Mathewes. I was Frederica Green, he was Gary Mathewes. Now his father, Gregory Mathewes Green. We were having our, let's see, next May will be the 39th anniversary. And he's been a priest for like 30 years. But at that time, he was an atheist. I was the kind of hippie that was a Mother Earth feminist, you know, a spiritual seeker kind of hippie. And he was the atheist, political, anti-war, you know, politics kind of hippie. So he was not interested in spiritual things at all. But he had a favorite professor who taught philosophy. So he went to, took all of his classes. Finally, philosophy of religion was the last one to take. And the professor said, "We're going to deal with original texts. So on next time you come to class, read just one of the Gospels to prepare. You can pick any Gospel you want." So he found, I guess he found one of those Good News Bibles that hadn't been torn up yet. And looked in it, found there were 4 Gospels. And found that Mark was the shortest, so he read Mark. But strangely enough, it kind of got under his skin, and it was the person of Jesus. And he just kept saying, Jesus, he has authority. It's like what he says, you just know it's true. It's got to be the truth. And if Jesus says there's a God, then maybe there is a God. And I was panicking, and I was saying, "You're not going to believe it. You're not going to turn into a Jesus freak, are you?" And kind of talked him off the ledge at that point. Those sort of disturbing things. And finally, we were planning our wedding. We had out in the woods, and my wedding dress was unbleached muslin, and I had my flowers in my hair, and we had a vegetarian reception. And we were walking walking into the clearing in a little wedding procession. We had a black Labrador with a red bandana around its neck in the procession with us. I always say it, when archaeologists discover my wedding album, hundreds of years from now, they'll be able to place the date within 5 years. They were doing those hippie weddings. So we were preparing for the wedding, and we told the priest we want to write our own vows. And he was an Episcopal priest, and he said, I can't do the wedding vow. I have to do one of the services, and there are these new experimental services. You can choose one of those, and we did. But he said to me, I have some advice for you. You keep jumping around from one religion to another, picking what you like here, picking what you like there. You will never grow spiritually, because your prejudices and your assumptions, your pre-existing ideas, are conditioning what you recognize or what you like. You're only going to choose the things you like. You're only going to choose the things you already agree with. So you cannot grow. You will not be challenged here. And he said, instead of picking all these different religions, choose one. Just choose one of the great world religions and accept it completely and let it act on you and let it change you. And it struck me that was really good advice. So I chose to become a Hindu. I just kept dodging the bullet. And our wedding, I read at the time for the offertory, I read a Hindu prayer. You know, I was totally into this. And we'd saved enough money that we could go to Europe for 3 months, for the whole summer. We could hitchhike around Europe, and we were vegetarians then, so we weren't eating very expensive, restaurant meals and staying in the hostels and places like that, as cheap as possible. $15 a day for the two of us. And it was wonderful, of course, and we saw a lot of wonderful things. We promised we would go back every 10 years, and we've actually never gone back, but we'll find a way to do it perhaps for our 40th, I hope. And on June the 20th, 1974, we came to Dublin. We'd been kind of all up to Scotland and back down to Wales, and took the ferry over to Ireland and hitchhiked into Dublin, and we had our backpacks. We went and found a bed and breakfast where we could stay and put down our backpacks. It was getting to be mid to late afternoon, so we went out just in the last hours of the day to see if there's anything open, any sightseeing we could do, if there was any museums, or we found a church that was open. Even if you're a Hindu, you have to go in churches when you're in Europe. So I was okay. I was cool with going in churches. It was open. There wasn't any service going on, but it was like open for tourists, I guess. And we went into the church, and he went off one way, I went off the other way. I was walking around looking at the stained glass windows and statues, and back, there at the back of the church in the front, as you look toward it, there was a great big main altar. And then on the sides, there were two lesser altars, or smaller side altars. And the one on the left, I walked up to it, and there was a statue of Jesus there. And I was just standing there looking at the statue. It was the kind that's called the Sacred Heart. Some of you probably know what that is. You've seen it, even if you don't know that name. It's the statue where Jesus is gesturing toward his heart. And the sculptor has depicted his heart on his chest. And it has the thorns are wrapped around it, and fire is springing out of the top of his heart. It's the image called the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And this was a vision that a Belgian nun had in the 18th century. Christ appeared to her and showed his heart and said, "Behold the heart that has so loved mankind." So I was standing there looking at the statue and kind of critiquing it as a work of art, and thinking, the hands are given away. They don't do the nails very carefully. That's where they cut the corners. And so I was like trying to decide whether it was good art or not. It was a well-executed statue. And suddenly I realized that I had fallen to my knees. I don't remember kneeling down. And I could hear a voice speaking to me. It was not something I heard with my ears. It was like there was a radio in my heart that I never knew was there. I felt this conviction from the moment it began. This has been here all my life, and I didn't know it was there. And it just snapped on, and this voice was filling my awareness. And the voice said, I am your life. It said, you think that your life is your name and your personality and your history and the things you've done, but that is not your life. I am your life. And it went on, it said, you think that your life is the life force, that you participate in the life force, and that your breath goes in and out, and that your heart beats. But even that is not your life. I am your life. I am the foundation of everything else in your life. It was a pretty stunning and disturbing moment for me. I stood up. I felt shaky. I couldn't comprehend what had happened. You know, I recently read a contemporary elder saying, if you're hearing a suggestion in your mind and you think, Lord, is this you telling me this, or is this a temptation from the evil one? How you can tell is that the Lord speaks with authority. You know, that is what it says all through the Gospel of Mark. He speaks with authority. Jesus does a healing, and people say, he speaks with authority. That's like a constant theme there. When it's the voice of the Lord, you really don't ask. You know that it's him. If it's the evil one, he wheedles and he tries different angles, and he just keeps suggesting that he doesn't have authority. And this, even though I didn't believe in Jesus, even though if you'd asked me on my way into the church, if you'd said, what do you think of Jesus? I would say, well, he probably never existed. These legends spring up. These are, you know, what does atheists always say about, you know, believers are just weak people that can't get through life without a crutch to lean on, so they make up these stories. But there he was, and it was the presence and the authority of this voice. Even though I could barely understand what he was saying, I knew it was true. I knew I could spend the rest of my life figuring out what it meant, but I already knew it was true. It just was that presence, that overwhelming presence, and the certainty that he always had been there, and that he was my Lord. You know, I didn't have a doubt about it. So I got up, I felt shaken. I couldn't talk about it. I didn't tell my husband for a week. By this time, we were down in the south of Ireland, hitchhiking one day, and I said to him, remember when we went in our church? Well, something happened to me, and I told him the story, and his reaction was, it'll pass. 30 years a priest at this point. Yeah, so it kind of took over our whole lives. Well, I wanted a Bible right away. I found got a little King James Bible, tried to read it, started with Mathewes. Was going through, there were things I didn't like. I didn't like that Jesus said to the Syrophoenician woman, I'm sent only to the children of the house of Israel, and it's not right for the dog to eat the children's bread. I was like, that's not nice. But as I went through even the things that offended me, I knew that he was Lord and I was not. I had had so much cockiness about my intelligence and my cleverness and my ability to, you know, to debate with people and undermine their faith. And even when I wasn't getting answers to my questions, I knew nevertheless, he's right, I'm wrong. I need to sit down and shut up and just listen for a while. This is, I think, a bigger miracle than the feeding of the 5,000. That's like me, you know. There's still a lot of work to do. For another 6 months, I bet, I still thought all religions are equal. It doesn't matter what God. I'm just going to switch from Hinduism to Jesus. But as I met other Christians and they talked to me, it was about 6 months later, the friend said, did you ever give your life to the Lord? And we said, we're not Baptists. My husband had grown up Episcopalian. So he said, well, really, it's okay. You can do that, even though you're not Baptist. So growing up in the South, we just associated it with that. So our friend Greg and my husband and I all knelt down together December 13th, 1974. ask the Lord to come into our hearts and be our Lord and take control of our lives. So gradually my theology caught up with where my heart had already gone. And yeah, so there was a lot of work still to do, but I think the big change was that I knew He was Lord. He was Lord, and He knew everything. And I didn't have to understand it all. I wasn't going to be able to understand it all. So that's the first part of my story, is how I kind of went from being dabbling in all Eastern religions to Christianity. And at that point, my husband and I, we went to seminary, went to an Episcopal seminary in Virginia. We both wanted to be ordained, but I couldn't find a bishop that was willing to. They had just approved women's ordination, and I couldn't find a bishop willing to ordain me at that point. After he had been a pastor a few years, though, I realized that I didn't want to be ordained because it's a really hard job. That's not a job that I want. That job is too hard for me, so I'm at peace about not being ordained. But so we spent 15 years with him as a priest in the Episcopal Church. And I want to go on from there and talk about how I went from like east to west, and then from Western Christianity to Eastern Christianity, what brought that about. But before I do this, I always want to pause, because sometimes when I tell my story, my conversion story, people say to me afterwards, God must really love you. God must really love you because He intervened in your life and He spoke to you. God has never spoken to me. I have never had an experience like that. God must not love me as much as He loves you. And what I always want to say is that God had to use extreme measures with me. This is like the story about the farmer trying to sell a donkey, and it's this great donkey, it can do anything, but you always have to hit it on the head with a 2x4 to get its attention. That was the 2x4 that God had to use, because nobody could talk to me about the Lord. Nobody could quote scripture to me. Nobody could even have me read the scriptures. I had a wall up. It was going to take something that extreme to break down my resistance and to show me, reveal to me in my heart that He does speak with authority and that He is the Lord. If you are one of those people who've just kept a steady faith all of your life, if you've gotten up every Sunday morning and gone to church all of your life, blessed are you. Blessed are you. Your faithfulness is so precious in Him. If you don't have on your conscience what I have to think back on, that brand new baby Christians in my college, I would try to destroy their faith. I take comfort where Jesus says, none can snatch them out of my hand. I have to trust that, but I should try. There are things like that. When I think about ridiculing Jesus and making fun of Him and trying to get Christians to doubt and to lose Him. As I said, if you've not grieved the heart of God, like I did, blessed are you. Rejoice and be glad, because your faithfulness is such a beautiful thing. God doesn't have to use extreme measures with you because you're available to Him. Because in your steady way, you just keep showing up. And that's an awful lot of what the faith is you just keep showing up. You just keep doing it. And because you were doing it, because you were faithful, when I was tired of making fun of you and blaspheming your God and ridiculing the things you believe in, when God had chastened me and turned my face to walk back in the door of a church again, you were already there. You had unlocked the church door. You had the lights on. You were making coffee. You handed me a bulletin. You showed me to a seat. Because of your faithfulness, there was a church for me to go to when God shut me out. And there are people in Huntsville tonight that God is going to shake out in this coming year. And you will be there for them. You will have the church going on year after year, no matter how it is ridiculed in the press and by the entertainment media, no matter how much it is misrepresented by Christians that just do a really bad job representing their Lord. Your steady faithfulness, great is your reward. Great is your crown in heaven. I admire you and I look up to you, and I try to follow in your footsteps and be a faithful Christian myself at this point in my life. And the other thing I was going to say is that when I tell the story, a lot of people say, you know, my daughter is like that, or my husband is like that, or my mother is like that. Most people have somebody that they love that is a lot like where I was when I was in college, somebody that they pray for a lot. And I want you to take encouragement from my story, because you see, God can reach anybody. If he can reach me, he can reach anybody. I was pretty fortified. And notice, I know what it's like when there's someone you wish you could reach, and you think about it, you pray about it a lot, and you keep thinking, should I say something? What should I say? Or what's different? Like things you might lead a conversation with, or should I buy this book for them? Or, you know, what, should I have this Christian music playing when they walk in the house? You know, you do a lot of plotting as if it's your burden. And the Lord said, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. If you have a burden, as if you have to be the one to convert this person. That is not your burden. If God has something for you to say to that person, you will know. He will bring it to your awareness. It'll, the right time, the right place, the right words will be there. Don't burden yourself with trying to force it to happen. Take courage from this. Be encouraged, because there's that great line in one of the Psalms that says, by my God, I can leap over a wall. And that's what he can do. The person has walls up, maybe they won't listen to anything you say. But by your God, you can leap over a wall. He's already on the other side of the wall. Every conversion is an inside job. Every conversion is from the Holy Spirit in their heart already stirring them up, as he did me. Everybody has that little radio. And with time, we can learn how to tune that radio so it's more accurate and we're tuned into Christ more of the time. That's what I'll be talking about tomorrow morning at Rick's church at Kingdom Life Fellowship, right? We'll be talking more about how do you tune in? How to where you can actually hear the voice of God more consistently. That's his gift, and he loves us. He loves us from the moment that he thinks of us, even before we're formed in our mother's womb. And he's inside that person. It seems to you to be behind those high walls. Every conversion is an inside job. So, from east to west, west to east, how that happened was we both went to Episcopal Seminary in Virginia, graduated in 1977. I had my seminary degree, but I was at home, a housewife, teaching Bible study, having babies, teaching natural childbirth classes, going to home births, having a home birth. It was a good time. We were really, really joyous in the 70s and in the 80s in the Episcopal Church. It was like the very end of the 80s. We began to be concerned because it was when some bishops were starting to say there is no resurrection. Jesus was not raised from the dead. Jesus was just a great teacher, but he didn't rise from the dead. It was disturbing to see that, well, why would a bishop have that? You know, you could have another job if you don't have that. You could be a cobbler, you know, there's all kinds of things you could have done. But why do you want to be a bishop? And the fact that there was like nobody had any authority to challenge him, or to say, you need to go on a long vacation and think about this. It was sort of like bullies ganging up, and they encourage each other, so that as one says something shocking, another one would say something else shocking. That Jesus was not born of a virgin, that Mary was raped by a Roman soldier. You know, horrible things like that. And nobody could say, don't say that. So it seemed to us, we had 3 children who were then like almost in their teens and in their teens. Where is this church going? But where my husband was pastor, we could teach the Nicene faith. But when they grow up, they got married, they move to another city, they go to the church down the block, it could be one of those pastors who are saying, there is no resurrection. So we began to think we needed to, first we did our best to try to call the church back. We had a number of priests got together, wrote a document they called the Baltimore Declaration, and they had T-shirts that said, have a Nicene day. And we found that with there was really not very much we could do. All our efforts weren't really making very much difference. That was long before, like the battles now are all about gay marriage and gay bishops. That was not on the agenda at all at this point, back in the late 80s, early 90s. It was actually the faith that was being challenged. One of the things that did get our attention was at the 1991 National Convention, there was a vote that clergy should abstain from sex outside of marriage. And the first vote was in the House of Bishops, and it was defeated. So, so why? It just seemed like the church was just going kind of wacky there. Where to go then? If we're going to go someplace else, we thought about one of the continuing Anglican churches, which have become much stronger in the years since then. But at the time, we thought, we can't go from a branch to a twig to a leaf. We need to get back to the trunk, the center of the trunk, back to the roots. So we thought, well, we'll become Catholic. And we visited some Catholic churches, and we had some problems with the theology still, because we had been evangelical. But we found that even if, no matter how pure the doctrine was that was taught in Rome, what you would run into on a local parish basis could be an awful lot like what we were seeing in the Episcopal Church. There were people who were questioning the resurrection. It didn't look like a safe harbor for our children. Other people make different decisions, and they have other factors they're considering. So I don't mean to criticize anyone else, but just to explain how our decision-making went. And we didn't really know what the option was going to be. Till one day a Lutheran pastor, a friend of ours, phoned and invited my husband to come over. And he said, there's a guy in town who's a representative of the Orthodox Church. And I'm just inviting all my pastor friends. We'll sit around the dining room table and we'll just talk. And where we grew up in Charleston, there was only one Orthodox church, and it was the Greek Orthodox Church, and you had to be Greek to go there. You know, that was what we assumed. We would never think of it as a church you could join. We thought it was a church that you couldn't be a member unless your name ended in AS or OS. You know, it was like it was their church. And so my husband went over there, and the guy he went to Orthodox will recognize this name. The priest that was in town was Father Peter Gilchrist. Father Peter's funeral was today. He battled cancer for a long time, got it bad, got well for 10 years. And, they could see the end was coming. It sounds like he had a really beautiful death. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to be there. Father Peter had been a Campus Crusade pastor. And with about maybe 8 of his other friends that were all in Campus Crusade, they were disturbed because they saw that they could visit the campus, they could bring a lot of students to Christ, and then they leave, they come back a year later, and the kids are no longer having anything to do with any Christian fellowship. So they thought, we need to invent like an organization that will be permanent. They realized they were inventing the church, basically was what they meant. So they decided, let's see how the early church did it. And they assigned everybody, you take liturgy, you take hierarchy, you take scripture, you take this. Find out how the early church did it, search the scriptures, and determine how the early church did these things. And as a couple of years went by with these studies and the reports coming in, they kept gathering together, and they realized they were reinventing the Orthodox Church. That the Orthodox Church actually had not changed. It had continued to do the things of the first century, the second century. It was still a church that was the very earliest church. They took the synagogue service that was mostly litanies, prayers, petitions, and scripture readings and psalms, and the temple service, which was sacrifice, and put them together. And that service was the earliest version of is first century. It's attributed to St. James, the brother of the Lord. And it was edited, and the version we use, the version you use here on Sunday morning, come back on Sunday morning, it's the 4th century edit of the 1st century liturgy. It's just never changed. There is no, when I became Orthodox and I realized they don't have a pope, then there's no way to stand up against the culture. You know, they don't have any boss that can say, you have to do this, you have to believe that, I'm going to kick you out of the church. It's like totally a grassroots church. The faith is determined by being what the mass of the people believed last year, and the year before that, and the year before that, and the year before that, going back in time. One of the St. Vincent of Lorraine, 7th century? I can't remember, around about there. St. Vincent said how you determine the true faith is what has been believed everywhere, always, and by all. And if you're passing on a faith that has been what everybody always believed for as long as you knew, and you pass that on intact, it just keeps doing that. It keeps like a snowball. It grows and grows, and there's no way to change it. If you wanted to change something, if you wanted to say he didn't rise from the dead, you would just put yourself out of the church. There wouldn't be any way to change it. You would just exclude yourself from the community. A story about that, in 1893, there was a conference in Chicago called the World Parliament of Religions. They had a centennial one in 1993, you might remember it. World Parliament of Religions was a gathering of representatives of all the different world religions, and they all got together to say it's all the same God, it doesn't matter what name you use. When you address this God, you just different faces to the same universal. And that's sort of what they call syncretism, where you kind of mingle all the religions together. And there was a priest in Brooklyn, had a parish in Brooklyn, and he went to Chicago at this 1893 conference to speak at this conference, and he spoke. And he agreed with all the principles of this conference, and he said, yes, that's right, you know, Jesus is just one of the names of God. And then he rose up to the top of the mountain. Oh, this was totally not Orthodox. But he gave a speech, that was his opinion. And he took the train back to Brooklyn and went to his church, and he put the key in the lock, and it wouldn't turn. Because people had already changed the lock so much. That's the power of the laity. That doesn't sound like what my grandma told me, and that's the bottom line.